buildings are assessed and graded for conservation. And you mentioned also the significance earlier. So I also wanted to ask you what makes it significant and how do you actually give the marks, so to say? And I hadn't thought about the realities of that before. How do you go about gauging a building significance? Do you reach out to communities with surveys? How do you do that?
Well, our approach to significance is based on the English Heritage guidance on values, which was, I can't remember the date of it now, but it was one of those that was set up before the split between English Heritage and Historic England. But it's still extremely valid because it asks questions about the evidential value, aesthetic value, community value, and others. And it's just enough to be able to prompt thought into why places actually matter. And assessing significance is, it's an art, essentially. It's about discussion, it's about insight, it's about research, it's about professional knowledge. And the way we do it is in English Heritage, because we rely on the knowledge and expertise of our property curators, who are archaeologists and building historians. And we have another team of historians who look into the development of properties. And they're able to advise and just their knowledge and say, well, this aspect, this wing of the building is the earliest aspect, the earliest bit of construction. So we know that that's extremely important. I'm working with our curators on a site in Lincoln where we've got degrading stonework, where you might look at it and go, well, there's not much there now, but our property curator, our head property curator, is absolutely adamant. This is one of the most significant pieces of early medieval carving, therefore it's of such significance we have to find the best ways of conserving it, probably through some sort of intervention, as I described before. So there's a combination of a lot of those things. So we are acknowledging, we're taking an expert approach, but of course that is not the only way of doing it. And of course, when we look outside of English heritage properties and look beyond our own mindset, we recognize that people have got lots of different views. Mm. And we've had some real challenges recently where we've been planning projects and development at some of our properties, which arguably are not ours, they're the communities, they're in the public realm. There's no gates to stop people coming in and out. They're very much part of townscapes and urban areas where our views have been strongly challenged by people. And rightly so, because the communities who love and care for these places and want to use them have very, very strong views. So we've definitely taken a view now to make a much more inclusive approach, listening to people's views when it comes to big projects. So there's no hard and fast rules to it, but it is professional judgment. How we've applied it at the end of the day in our conservation frameworks is that best judgment to define which parts of the property we really want to give the most attention to. And actually, to be honest with you, it's very challenging because so many of our properties are hugely significant. And one of our speakers said, how do you decide between your children? You can't. You have to make a very informed professional view.
I think this would be potentially really interesting for a kind of collaborative approach from various countries. I mean, I'm not sure whether you know the fantastic study of the European Historic Houses Association on impact of historic houses for communities and assessing this. And they have a list of a number of parameters. And I'm trying to actually create such a catalog for the Indian properties, also in finding appropriate management schemes. For instance, one house might be near the sea, one might be in the hills, one might be in the city center, and all of these require totally different approaches. So if I want to find management schemes, I cannot use one for all, but I have to assess it individually, but I can't do it for 70,000 buildings. So I have to, find kind of, tools to do this and strategies. So I think this would be really interesting listening to some of the private historic houses associations and, it's institutions such as yours to find, come up with some good tools and evaluation schemes and solutions. And I was, when I saw this, the Roman villa, I immediately thought of Carnuntum, because sometimes if you have nothing there, it can be one of the most exciting places to visit. I mean, I don't know whether you've heard of Carnuntum outside of Vienna. It is such a popular and really amazing destination of just one part of a Roman villa, but then they kind of established a visitor center and lots of activities for children, learning, how to make recipes from Roman times, and a chariot race actually that children can participate in, and lots of games. It's so exciting. And, I wouldn't have assumed, that this could be done, because normally I think you need the house, the roof, all of the rooms, the furniture, but it's not necessary. The success, the importance for the community is not dependent on the roof of the structure. So how would you assess this kind of significance for the communities when you have something like Stonehenge? And I think so much money was invested in this visitor center, and but then it didn't immediately result in more visitors necessarily, and so on. So how do you actually look at the significance from a community point of view?
I think there's, you're right. You don't need a roof to allow people's imagination to run wild. I mean, we've got lots of properties in English heritage which are roofless ruins. There's stone monuments, stone circles. They're wonderful places like Grimes Graves, which is a Neolithic stone quarry, where the exciting thing is to actually go down into the quarry itself and see where people took out flints which actually turned into tools, and that whole understanding of very early communities absolutely resonates, particularly with school children, particularly with people who love to be inspired by ideas and creativity. So I think there's lots you can do on a property that doesn't necessarily need to be defined by the standard approaches. And we're going to be running a project in probably next year, which is looking at Richborough Roman Fort, which is where the Romans originally came to Britain. It's the gateway to Roman Britain, where we're going to be building a new gateway, actually in the site itself, on the site of where the original gateway for the fort was. So you have this whole wonderful reinvention of what it would have been like to approach this fort, what it would be like to actually stand above the ruins, which are quite hard to interpret when you're just wandering around them. But actually looking down on them will really bring it to life. And of course, through that, we're talking to local groups and local stakeholders who've got a strong interest in what we're doing, to make sure that we're learning from their interests. And we've done a lot of that recently in Bristol, with that church that I mentioned, because it's not ours in the sense of, we're responsible for it, accountable, but it's part of the community, and the community want to see a new future for it. So we're trying to facilitate what they're looking for, not just dictate.
Right. There's a question, thank you, from Ayushi, for everyone. Thank you so much for your inspiring insights. I have a question for all the speakers. Conservation is driven by the human desire to save, preserve, and conserve as much as we can. But Rob, as you outlined, climate change is a serious concern, eclipsing our horizons. In light of these concerns, how much can we really conserve? Is it actually a good and sustainable idea to conserve as much as we can? How do you decide what should be conserved and what should not? Could you perhaps discuss a time when you decided to not conserve a painting or property heritage site?
Would you like me to have a go with that, or pass on to one of the speakers?
Why don't you just comment quickly, and then we pass it on to the others?
Okay, well, I'll comment first. Firstly, I think that we've got to recognise with climate change that it's a change that will impact our working lives and our businesses and our landscapes and ecology and the rest of it. But we've got to look at what matters. So this comes back to significance. We value places; they're important in times of change. So I think anything's told us certainly through COVID and lockdown, or through times of catastrophic events, people look to culture, they look to their history, look to heritage. So I think in a way we will want we'll have a desire to look after places no matter the challenges we face. I think there's a very human nature. I think the challenge in looking after all the sites in our care is recognizing that the environment we're working in is changing. So what do we do? And I always believe our first principle, and this is really to Mita's point, is maintenance. You know, if we're not maintaining our properties properly, if we're not actually giving the due care or attention on a little and often day-to-day basis and understanding the processes of change, then we're nowhere. So the important thing is think of core maintenance as the front line. So we like to talk about adaptation or mitigation, all these other things, and building resilience. Maintain your properties.
Right, and you also mentioned thermal comfort in a way, which is different from the 21st, in the 21st century in comparison to other centuries, and we can't really adapt this so easily. Maybe Austin, you could also try to answer this question that I usually was asking.
Yeah, I would say that there are so many ways that we can understand what climate change means and the impact that it will have on our heritage. And they're not direct always, it's not always obvious, but as people move into the cities because they have no more water in the countryside, that has a massive impact on the heritage we have in cities and the access to heritage elsewhere. So it's very complicated, and I think that my attitude or my response to this would be that we need to understand the role of the environment within sites and within buildings, and it's not straightforward. There are no magic numbers that I have at my fingertips to tell you what the right environment is unless I observe and I record. And so observing and recording the environment and monitoring the environment to determine whether or not, for example, you have mold growth in your building, or if you have salt coming out of the walls, or if your slight heating will actually really improve or not. Those are questions that I can't answer unless I actually check. But you asked, what about when we don't conserve? And I would say that the best thing to do is not touch anything until you understand what if there are reasons, if there are actually changes. Oftentimes people say, look, this painting's very damaged and degraded. And I say, okay, well, let's come, monitor it and see what's happening. And if next year it looks the same, then we'll do the same. We'll wait. We don't have to wait for it to get damaged. But I think that cautious non-intervention is much more powerful than quick decision-making because we want to fix something up. But at the same time, I absolutely agree with Rob. Maintenance and maintenance of the envelope is fundamental, because the catastrophic disasters that will occur if maintenance doesn't occur. We've seen this in Mali, and how important the maintenance of the earthen structures are every year, because if they're not maintained, when the rain comes, they will be washed away. And so maintenance and involvement with communities to ensure that maintenance is built into the management plan. So the roofs are maintained, so the drains are cleaned, so that the waterways are there in the right place, so that that growth doesn't occur around buildings and cause greater fire risk. These are kind of basic ideas, but they're not. And therefore, I think that maintenance is so much more important than intervention.
So this brings me to another question, namely, on the one hand, respecting local materials, local traditions. On the other hand, reaching out to new technologies. Rob, you also mentioned the case with the roof, the waterproofing of the roof and so on. So to what extent in the maintenance do you consider these kind of modern technologies or modern materials to assure that the buildings are safe?
I think I'll give the example of what we're doing at Kenwood House in North London, where we're working in partnership with Ecclesiastical Insurance, who are a big insurer of historic buildings and schools and other institutes around the country, and a firm called Shepherd FM, who are tech developers, so they're the brains behind all this. What we're working with there is working on is testing how buildings perform. Now we're already tracking our environmental performance, temperature, relative humidity, to understand the conditions for the interior of the building. What we wanted to understand was could we use the data coming through to test our energy use, the use of where in the building was energy used, where are the risks in terms of peaks and flows for power, and what are the can we capture what's happening in terms of fire risk, compliance, security. So basically trying to digitize the whole property. And that's good. We've got a series of sensors all over the building, which is recording activity on a 24-hour basis, and that's starting to build a set of patterns. And what's happening is the system is learning what good looks like, and we can define what good looks like. And when you see the deviation from what that looks like, then you realize even before there's an issue, you're going to have to address it. So it'll know if you're going to have a water leak, for example, and a water leak in a historic building can be disastrous for your collection and your interiors. It'll know before you need to know that you've got spikes in electric use, so you can get onto trying to resolve the problem in a much more predictive way than you can do than if you go then the phone goes and you've got to get people to sort it out. So it's a good example of how you can use tech to start thinking about your maintenance in a completely different way. We've got loads to learn from this yet. It's early days, but it's really exciting to see how it's set up. And the guys from Ecclesiastical have said that Kenwood is now as digitally connected as the Shard.
I was also thinking of some insulation material, because especially, a lot of the heat radiation comes from the roof. In India, we are dealing with we're trying to find natural ways to cool down buildings and so on. And I've looked at some German materials that you can use to put on the roof to have an insulation to either cool it or make it warmer in the winter. So have you ever worked with something like this, to materials to put on the roofs?
Not directly on the roofs, no. I mean, insulation in buildings is really important, particularly in the UK environment. But
we have flat roofs, of course, in India. That's slightly different. Yeah.
Yeah, and we haven't. We're using fairly conventional approaches, admittedly, in terms of insulation. Back in my National Trust days, we did try and use Hardwick wool. Lovely sustainable story. You're taking the wool from the sheep up on the fells and the Lake District and turning it into a new product for a new market. But it turned out not to be the best solution after all, because actually there were lice and insects actually within the wool itself, which then actually creates its own problem with a historic building. But that's learning. We've got to learn from these things. We've got to be able to experiment and see what works. So I think we're going to keep on looking for new solutions to reduce our energy. But at the moment, our focus is on actually some of my heating systems in English heritage properties are almost as old as the properties themselves. They're not even worth the museum pieces.
Right. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. This was a real luxury for us to just spend 2 hours listening to these fantastic presentations about various adaptations, issues, and of historic buildings in different parts of the world. Thank you so much. Please stay in touch, and I'd really love to follow up. And especially now that I know what your interests are, and so on, I'd like to put you in touch with some other people who are working in similar fields. As I said, the water and heritage particularly would be great. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.